War has always been shaped by the weapons carried by the individual soldier, long before missiles, drones, or nuclear weapons defined global conflict. The outcome of battles depended on what a single infantryman carried into combat. His rifle, his ammunition, and his ability to fight at ground level determined whether an army advanced, held its ground, or collapsed. The evolution of infantry weapons across the 20th and 21st centuries tells the story of how warfare itself transformed from rigid trench lines to fast-moving mechanized combat, and finally to the highly mobile, technology-driven battlefields of the modern era. This evolution didn't happen overnight. It was shaped by hard lessons learned in blood, mud, and fire. Each new generation of weapons was a response to the failures of the previous one. To understand modern infantry combat, we have to go back to the trenches of World War I. When World War I erupted in 1914, most of the world's armies entered the conflict with technology that had changed little. Since the late 19th century, the dominant weapon was the bolt-action rifle, long, heavy, accurate, and powerful. Rifles like the German Gewehr 98, the British Lee Enfield, and the Russian Mosin-Nagant armed millions of soldiers. They were designed for engagements at long distances, where disciplined volleys of fire could break enemy formations in open fields. They fired full-power cartridges capable of killing at extreme ranges. In theory, they were perfect weapons for traditional warfare. In reality, they were terribly suited for the industrialized battlefield that emerged. As the war settled into trench warfare, combat became static, confined, and brutally close. Soldiers fought from narrow trenches, advanced through no man's land under machine gun fire, and engaged the enemy at distances measured in yards, not hundreds of meters. In this environment, the bolt-action rifle's slow rate of fire was a critical weakness. A trained soldier could fire maybe 10 to 15 aimed shots per minute, and reloading required manually operating the bolt after every single shot. Under intense pressure, this limited rate of fire often proved fatal. Infantry assaults stalled not because soldiers lacked courage, but because their weapons couldn't deliver enough firepower to suppress the enemy. Despite the new technology, many military leaders entered World War I believing that wars would still be decided by bayonet charges. Bayonets were long, heavy, and permanently fixed to rifles during assaults. Training emphasized aggression and closing with the enemy. In reality, bayonet fighting was far less common than anticipated. Most casualties were inflicted by artillery, machine guns, and rifle fire. However, the psychological role of the bayonet was significant. It symbolized an offensive spirit, even as the battlefield increasingly favored firepower over cold steel. This disconnect between outdated doctrine and modern reality forced armies to confront an uncomfortable truth. Infantry weapons had to change. While bolt-action rifles struggled, machine guns thrived. Weapons like the Maxim and the Vickers could fire hundreds of rounds per minute, were devastatingly effective on defense. A single machine gun crew could halt an entire infantry assault. The dominance of machine guns forced infantry to rethink their role. Instead of mass formations, soldiers began to operate in smaller units, using cover and coordinated movement. But the average infantryman still lacked a weapon that could match the machine gun's firepower at close range. Late in the war, a new class of weapon emerged, the submachine gun. Designed for close-quarters combat, these compact automatic weapons fired pistol-caliber ammunition at high rates of fire. The German MP-18, introduced in 1918, was especially effective in trench raids and stormtrooper tactics. It offered infantry unprecedented firepower in confined spaces, but they had limited range and accuracy. While revolutionary, they weren't a complete replacement for the rifle. Still, their appearance signaled the beginning of a new era. By the end of World War I, it was clear that the future infantry weapon would need to balance range, accuracy, and firepower more effectively. The period between the world wars was one of intense experimentation. Military theorists analyzed the failures of trench warfare and sought weapons that could restore mobility to the battlefield. Some nations experimented with semi-automatic rifles, which allowed soldiers to fire multiple rounds without manually cycling the bolt. Others focused on improving submachine guns. Yet budget constraints and conservative leadership slowed progress. Many armies entered World War II still relying heavily on bolt-action rifles, despite knowing their limitations. This time, however, the battlefield would evolve far more rapidly. World War II marked a turning point. Unlike the static trenches of World War I, this war featured fast-moving fronts, mechanized units, and combined arms warfare. Infantry now fought alongside tanks and aircraft in dynamic combat environments. and this shift demanded weapons that could keep up. Despite new developments, bolt-action rifles like the German Karabiner 9AK, the British Lee Enfield No. 4, and the Soviet Mosin-Nagant remained the standard for most armies at the start of the war. They were accurate, reliable, and powerful, but as battles became more fluid and close-range, their limitations became increasingly apparent. The United States took a bold step by adopting the M1 Garand as its standard infantry rifle. This semi-automatic weapon allowed American soldiers to fire 8 rounds rapidly without manual cycling. In combat, this gave U.S. infantry a significant advantage in firepower. Veterans often describe the Garand as a life-saving weapon. In close engagements, the ability to fire multiple rounds quickly could overwhelm an enemy position before they could respond. Other nations, like the Soviet Union with its SVT-40 and Germany with the G-43, also developed semi-automatics, but none were produced in enough numbers to completely replace their bolt-action rifles. World War II also saw the widespread adoption of submachine guns. The German MP-40, Soviet PPSH-41, British Sten, and American Thompson became iconic weapons of the era. They excelled in urban combat, forest, and close-range assaults. The Soviet Union, in particular, embraced the submachine gun as a mass infantry weapon. The PPSH-41, with its high rate of fire and large drum magazine, proved absolutely deadly in urban battles like Stalingrad. But perhaps the most important innovation of the war was the German Sturmgewehr 44. This weapon introduced the concept of the assault rifle. It fired an intermediate cartridge that balanced the range of a rifle with the controllable automatic fire of a submachine gun. The STG-44 allowed soldiers to engage effectively at typical combat distances while maintaining a high rate of fire. Although it arrived late and into few numbers to change the war's outcome, its influence was profound. The assault rifle concept would define infantry weapons for the rest of the 20th century. After World War II, military planners studied combat data extensively. They discovered that most infantry engagements happened at ranges under 300 meters. Full-power rifle cartridges were often overkill, and controllable automatic fire was far more valuable than extreme range. This realization drove the adoption of intermediate cartridges and selective fire weapons. The Soviet Union led this revolution with the AK-47. Simple, rugged, and reliable, the AK became the most widely used rifle in history. Its design emphasized reliability over precision. It could function in mud, sand, snow, and with very little maintenance. For armies with limited training in harsh operating environments, this made it the ideal weapon. The AK-47 cemented the assault rifle as the standard infantry weapon worldwide. The United States initially resisted the assault rifle concept, but experiences in Korea and Vietnam forced a reevaluation. The result was the M16 rifle, firing a small caliber, high-velocity cartridge. The M16 emphasized accuracy, lightweight design, and controllable automatic fire. Early reliability issues in Vietnam tarnished its reputation, but later improvements made it one of the most effective infantry weapons of the modern era. Today's infantry weapons are vastly different from their predecessors. Modern rifles feature advanced optics, accessory rails, suppressors, and specialized ammunition. Soldiers are trained to fight in decentralized units, supported by drones, communication systems, and precision firepower. Yet the core principles remain unchanged: reliability, adaptability, and lethality. Modern weapons like the M4 carbine, the AK-74, and various bullpup rifles reflect decades of evolution shaped by the lessons of 2 world wars. The evolution of infantry weapons from World War I to the modern battlefield is a story of constant adaptation. Each generation of weapons emerged in response to the failures of the last. Bolt-action rifles gave way to semi-automatics. Submachine guns bridged the gap to assault rifles. And modern weapons now integrate technology that was unimaginable a century ago. But one truth remains constant: war is still fought by soldiers on the ground, and the weapon they carry will always shape how they fight, how they survive, and how history remembers them. Thanks for watching. If you found this interesting, be sure to like and subscribe for more deep dives into military history and technology. See you next time.